All right, welcome everybody. This is episode 7 of Full Throttle Leaders with Michael Falato. I'm the CEO and founder of Full Throttle Falato Leads, basically an automation company for lead gen. And today we got Steve Goldberg, who is a diehard CRO from Austin, Texas. Steve, why don't you tell us what kind of grabbed your attention to even do this podcast today?
Yeah, so I've always been on the go-to-market side. I've been, running, big teams and building and growing, organizations. And I haven't had the time to just ever take a breath and really, do these types of conversations that I can spend the time really understanding what's happening in the market. I think we're going through a massive market shift right now.
Hmm?
And what I'm seeing, I think this is like a tectonic shift of what's happening. And I love to talk to, people that are part of that and they identify that and they see the how the market is shifting and, want to be part of it because, we years ago we went through this shift where it was from client server to the cloud. And when I was at Salesforce, we experienced that. And I got to Salesforce when we were just going public. And I was one of the, founding salespeople in the field where we're building out an enterprise motion. And I had the world as my oyster, pretty much. We had, lots of opportunity. But what made us unique there was that, we really turned our architecture and our value prop, and we helped our customers figure out how to be more agile and more flexible. And when we were competing with a lot of these big companies out in the market that were entrenched in these organizations, but not adding enough value to their customer base. So we had to design a sales process and a go-to-market process to show them how to do it, but then also explain to them how we're going to make them successful and get to the business outcomes.
Hmm.
And we were competing with these development companies too, like the .NETs of the world that the IT teams were building. And I fast forward that to today's world, I think this is a bigger shift than that. As companies are now, you're seeing a lot of companies that are start off with the Gen AI, now it's agentic AI, and they're competing against like these bigger players out there. And the bigger players are trying to figure out how to change their pricing models and they're trying to, change their business models. And then you have a lot of upstarts that are also, going for market share. And I think that this shift happening right now will be like a once in a lifetime shift. And so I love talking to people and talking about these things with people that are like-minded, and that's what kind of grabbed my attention for this.
Awesome. I got a question for Salesforce. I was always told, through my 30 years of selling, that Salesforce kind of invented the SDR role. That people were selling all from A to Z, and Salesforce like, why don't we have people out there hunting for the sellers? Is that true?
I don't know if they invested. I think they invented the customer success manager role.
Hmm.
Uh, I think what they figured out how to invent was they figured out how to invent, more of the top of the funnel and true outbound motion.
Mm.
And an SDR role was part of that. And the way you do SDRs in like an enterprise versus commercial, I think that they were the ones that adapted a different approach and made it more personalized and like let's go call everyone and let's go spray and pray. What they invented was you've got to be much more personal in your approach. And you've got to be able to reach people and do the right level of discovery versus just, let's just send out a bunch of emails, make a bunch of phone calls, and just hope somebody picks up and answers.
Yeah. What's your favorite new tech toy now that you've learned in as a CRO?
So when I was a CRO, I depended a lot on my RevOps team to do a lot of work. And I was deep into the data. I was really deep into like understanding like pipeline conversion rates and what are the leading indicators around win rates and productivity metrics. And I would meet with a RevOps person every morning at 9:30. And I would look at all the data out there. And what I'm finding now as as I step back a bit, is there some pretty interesting technologies that will do a lot of that work, like products like I'm starting to work quite a bit with Cloud Cowork. I mean, what you can build and design with Cloud Cowork is going to be transformational, I think, and like the type of like workflows and autonomous agents that you can design around that is going to drive so much productivity out there. And it's someone like me who's a business user. I don't need to develop or code, and I can really build a lot of my logic that way and get automated data coming to me, and also how I'm managing, a lot of the meaningful tasks that I would do. So I'm just getting my hands on that, and that's incredible. But as a CRO, you know, I I think a lot of the technology out there, I think you've got to focus on the architecture and the foundation before you start to put all the right systems and processes in place. And so, once you get the architecture down, then you can start to design all the systems associated to that. It doesn't matter like what technology you use. If you've got a bad process, you're just going to get to an answer faster, which is the wrong answer.
Yeah. What do you think was been the best KPIs or OKRs that you managed to be most important to you in your role, or just as a person that's been in technology most of its life?
I think if you're running a business, like people talk about gross retention, which is if you've got 100% of your base, what percentage of that base is actually renewing?
Uh-huh.
I view net retention as a lot more important because if you look at gross, what percent of my base is renewing, but what percentage of my base is buying more products from me? And that means if they're buying more products from you, that means that you're they're renewing. And and so you got to look at those metrics and then you build your processes around that. Are you trying to grow net retention or gross retention? And you want to build your processes around kind of what your growth levers are. And so, from a KPI standpoint, I really the hardest part to figure out, and I haven't really cracked this, is how do you figure out what the sentiment is? What are the behaviors? Like, you start out with all this pipeline at the beginning of the quarter, and everyone tries to drive you to pipeline. But then as you kind of get through the quarter and into the quarter, stuff just falls out. But why does that fall out? Like it doesn't just fall out. I mean, like what are the sentiments? What are the behaviors? What are the things that are not happening that you don't know about? And so I always like to find the tools that can dig into the data to show me behavioral sentiment data. Because as a CRO, it's really hard to get the sentiment. You can get objective data, but you're not in all the conversations. You don't see actually what's happening. People move things around a bit,
Mhm.
and I think a lot of people hide things.
I think the call sentiment when I was at JobVite, like the first gong of the world, that was kind of a big thing. Like they can pinpoint what you're saying, what the sentiment was. I mean, it's obviously much more than it is now, just like the Fireflies solution. But I mean, to try to pinpoint, unless you're on a call with a rep, what's going on, whether it's customer success with a client or or sales with a net new logo, that was kind of hard.
Yeah. Well, it's hard because I mean, if you got a team that's always on that's sitting in their office and they're talking to customers in their office, that's one thing. But you have people that are in the field, they're out in front of customers, and it's hard to find that sentiment unless they're recording their meetings, and so that's the hardest part is understanding the actual sentiment of what's happening. I mean, look, I've used all the forecasting tools and all the pipeline tools and all the analytics data and all the tools and like ideally you want something that's going to be as flexible to use. Like what doesn't work to me is when you have to modify your process to fit the systems you bought versus let your processes design the systems.
Yeah,
Those that are the most flexible, because when you think about forecasting, for an example, the way you forecast at the beginning of the quarter is very different than how you forecast at the end of the quarter. So things change all the time. There's forecasting calls and then there's forecasting. And then there's managing the pipeline. I think you got to put as much scrutiny in the pipeline as you do in the forecast. But you need, I think too many of the systems out there today, they force you to adapt your processes into their systems. And
yeah.
that does have to change.
What um, what was your favorite lesson you learned, either from winning or losing?
The biggest lesson I learned is when you're starting to work with well, there's two things. When you're starting to work with a company, any company you jump into, like I'm typically not the first CRO into a company.
Hmm.
And so when I come into companies, there's a lot of people that the founders that have done really great things for the company. But then when the company changes, you have someone that does like a lot of different things and they're very well respected in the organization. In some cases, the founder CEO has these great relationships with a lot of the people, and you end up creating your organizational structure sometimes around people, not around the strategy. And I made that mistake once.
Hmm.
I should have pushed back harder, and I was forced to try to change the go-to-market infrastructure around a person because the CEO and the founder wanted to keep that person. And then eventually that person left. And then all of a sudden now you have to like unwind that entire thing. Because when you make one change to an org, that's not just one change. You pull the onion back and there's a lot of other changes that you need to make. And I think a lot of people make that problem, they make that same mistake is they want to protect somebody. They don't want somebody to leave. So they build around them. They try to give them too much, him or her too much. And instead, they build a process around a person, and then you're not building a process around the customer. You're not building a process around your strategy. And unwinding that is really hard, number one. Number two is as a CRO, I always thought that when I first got into my first CRO job, I thought it was like all about like I had to be the best salesperson.
When was this?
This was when I was at my first CRO job was when I was at SalesLoft in 2020. And I was always running sales teams. And, when you think about being a CRO is really you're the chief architect. You're the chief go-to-market architect. And you've got to architect and design something. You got to keep people, you want to cultivate people from within. You want to keep them motivated. I love to create environments that people want to win for each other. They want to be part of a team. They want to win for you. They're maniacally focused around the customer and they're a high integrity culture. Like they do things because it's the right thing to do. They care about the outcome of a customer, what they're trying to achieve. And so stepping back from that for a second, I think where a lot of CROs make mistakes, because I've made these too, is is you've got to spend, you know, you got to spend enough time with the ELT and with the board as well to make sure that, you're aligning with the strategy. And every company I come into, I always read this book called The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins. And it shows you it's a STARS methodology. So it shows you how to integrate into a company and understand the current situation. Are they a startup? Are they a turnaround? Are they a realigning success? Are they a sustaining success? And then you build your A priorities and B priorities and quick wins around that. And so many people come into a company and saying, I did this at this company. I'm going to do this here. I'm going to bring all the people over. I'm going to implement all the same processes. And you're at a totally different company with a different culture, with a different customer base. And you got to be really thoughtful about that. So you integrate in. And if you bring all the people in from places you've been and you have a culture that already exists, now you're creating a clash of cultures.
Yeah, they're
So
going to be
your
very.
job is
Yeah.
you got to integrate those things together. The other big thing that's on my mind a lot is so a lot of times as you're going through your annual operating plan for your next year, which typically starts in like October, August, September timeframe, if you're on a calendar or a January 31st fiscal year. And the CEO and the board or the CFO is trying to say to you, okay, here's your plan. Most CROs just say, okay, sure, it's my plan. And all of a sudden you're building a plan that's got like really just no math. You can make a CFO can make it look like anything on a spreadsheet. So you've got to really spend the time and use data to start to figure out is that plan even realistic? So you have to look at previous productivity metrics. You got to look at pipeline metrics. You got to look at street quota. You got to look at your hiring plan. You got to look at your conversion rates. You got to look at all that data. And you got to work with and partner with your CFO and your CEO and the board because the math needs to make sense. The math logic doesn't always work. Just because you grew 15% last year, you're going to go 30% this year. But what if you don't have enough street quota on the street? What if you're not enabling? What if your ramp times are slower?
Or
What if
what
your
if, what if
productivity?
what if something changes drastically, like the price or the marketplace or the economy?
Right.
And
And so what happens is if you don't have those conversations and partner with your CFO,
yep,
partner with your CFO and partner with your CEO,
a sense.
eventually as you get into next year, you're going to typically see 20% of people making the number and more people leaving. You're putting a ton of pressure on them. So you've got to have the math, and then you got to build your processes around the data, and then you got to partner with your product team to build a bottoms up forecast too to map to the solutions you're going to bring to market and how that maps up against all this. So all those things to me need to add up. And I think in a lot of cases, the CFO builds a plan and the CRO takes it. And look, you never know exactly how you're going to get to a plan, but I do think you got to be collaborative in that effort and partner in that effort. And look, you got to figure out what makes the most sense for the business because of course you got to grow. Of course you got to like improve your retention. But I think it's important that like you're just both on the same page and you can stand up together and you want to push each other, but you want to have a seat at the table versus just go off and sell.
Yeah, you're bringing each other on the same canoe trip and rowing the same way versus here's what I'm going to blame you if this doesn't work, or you're going to blame me versus let's come up with this together so we have mutual acceptance of what we're going to plan to do and buy.
Right.
So it
Yeah, I
makes,
mean, look, most board meetings are 80% the CRO. But what about the product leader? Are they delivering the capabilities that they need to deliver to actually differentiate yourself and make your customer successful and help build the value prop? Like are they held as much accountable as you are as the CRO?
yeah.
I mean, look, any CRO out there that would be listening to this, you've been in all the board meetings. How much of that board meeting is focused on what the product team is delivering?
Or just the client success too side of things. You know,
Yeah,
if you're
I
not
think
making
that,
people
yeah.
happy and you're ignoring them or you have poor response time and they feel like the sales guy sold it and now they don't give a crap, that's not good either.
Yeah, I mean, you got to do the math in a way and say, look, if say that I have 120% street quota on the street, and I've got and my win rates are say lower than the market would say, like say they're like in the low teens. My conversion rates are also in the low teens, but I have enough street quota on the market, and every year my productivity metrics are going down. Then you got to say, okay, well. Is it a productivity problem? Yeah, there's definitely sales execution issues in that process. But if they're that far off, there has to be a sentiment issue in the base. There's got to be something wrong with the customer base. And you've got to look at that data and figure out, well, what's truly wrong and what's actually creating the bleeding, and don't just put a Band-Aid over it. And I think a lot of people just put a Band-Aid over it because they're trying to put so much pressure on the revenue leaders and not enough effort into looking at what the product's actually delivering. Are they hitting the dates they said they're going to hit? What's in those dates? So as you're building your financial plan for the year, what is going to be the product roadmap that's going to help you support that plan? And the product team needs to partner with the CFO and with the CRO to ensure that they're very much aligned. And the CMO needs to be working very closely with them to build the right value positioning, to get the right personas out there, get the right positioning out there. And there's this concept called the nine blind people and the elephant. And I believe a CEO's job is to make sure that everybody knows it's an elephant. And in a lot of times they don't.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like you're looking at the elephant and you might think it's a zebra or a giraffe I mean, a giraffe would be a little far-fetched, but if you think, if you don't know if it's an elephant, you got people working off different pieces of paper and not coordinated. And I think that's the problem with a lot of companies is everybody does not know it's an elephant.
So tell me, I know that we talked a little bit before the recording about your background, where you've been. So if you could give a little bit of that, like what's your history in
Yeah,
these, and then what you're doing now, which is what we're talking
yeah,
about.
yeah. So my background is I've always grown up in high performance sales culture from parametric technologies. I started off as a recruiter before that for PTC, which was a very intense sales organization to Siebel, and I spent 10 years at Salesforce when we were just moving into the cloud and we were just building out an enterprise. I'm sorry, we were just building out an enterprise sales team and primarily from an inside
Salesforce,
sales team.
Salesforce bought Siebel. Is that what happened?
No, no, Oracle bought Siebel, but I was at Siebel and then I went to Salesforce. In fact, I walked away from a massive deal at Siebel, about $3.5 million deal. I walked away from that before it closed to go over to Salesforce. And Salesforce was a small company at that time that no one ever heard from. Siebel was the 800-pound gorilla at that point. And I got there in 2003 and I spent, 10 years there, about 10 years. And, I was doing the first deals at Dell, AT&T and Walmart. And we ended up probably selling Dell at that point. Um, you know, upwards of almost 100 million, 75 million to 100, AT&T, very significant deals from like totally white space deals. But those were partnership deals. Like those were relationship businesses. Those were like, we were partnering with them, but we were showing them how to be more agile and more flexible and that they want to globalize a lot of their processes. And we were competing against like all the big players in the space. And so then I was managing those teams. And then, after 10 years, it was time to go do something else. A lot of the people I had worked with were starting to do other things. And so I ended up going with the CRO of Salesforce to my next couple companies. And he's an incredible guy and a great mentor to me and one of the best people, such a great person. And we ended up going to these companies and so I went with him and I like helped build the verticals at Yext. We're just going public there. And then from there, I went over to be the chief revenue officer of a company called SalesLoft. We were about 50 million at the time, and felt like we were in third place. And I ran the whole go to market. We ended up selling that to Vista in 2021, and I spent another couple years there. And by the time I left, we were roughly around 250 million, and that was my entree into private equity. And then I ended up, and it's very different going from, we can have a whole different podcast on the VC board versus a private equity board. And Vista was like a great entree into it because they come with a methodology, that's for sure. And I learned a lot there. And then I ended up going to work for a private equity after that because I wanted to understand how private equity works behind the board table.
How is
So
it?
I loved it. It was a firm called Primera. They're incredible people. And I got involved in deals they were evaluating and brought them into the value creation team and sat on a board. I was a board observer a lot, so I played the role of the liaison between the board and the ELT. And I brought a CRO community together, and then I was ready to go back and operate. So I committed to do it for 1 year, and then I ended up joining a company called Power School as its chief revenue officer, about 750, $800 million company, growing. What they shared was about 7-ish% organically, going to do a bunch of M&A, but we had to transform the go-to-market because we needed to realign around a customer. We needed to build a government affairs team. We needed to change our compensation models. And we were just really not aligned around the customer. And so I came in with partnering with Bain Co. to restructure and redesign the entire go-to-market. But at the point of after a year, as we were going through that annual operating plan that I just shared with you, was clear to me was the next few years was about restructuring the architecture of the product with negative growth. And that's just not my skill set. So I felt I left it in a better place. Like kind of, you ever read the book, The All Blacks by the New Zealand rugby team, where when you put the jersey on and when you take it away, you leave it in a better place. And I felt that I left Power School in a better place, implementing a lot of their sales processes and their go-to-market processes, that it was at a good time to hand it off because that's not my skill set. My skill set is not sustaining negative growth. My skill set is around growth, and that's what gets me excited. So I stepped away from that, and for the first time in my life, doing something that I had no idea what I was going to do. Like I looked at a lot of other roles, and I just didn't feel it was right for me to stand up in front of all these people at sales kickoff and tell them that they should be excited about something that I just didn't believe in. And so I felt it was the right time to pass it off. And
How long ago was that?
this was in January,
Okay.
just
Wow.
January. Yeah. I mean, I walked away from a lot,
Do
my
you have
bonus,
like
everything.
two or three clients now that you're doing kind
Yeah.
of?
So now I stepped away from that and I wanted to get in the middle of where the market was going around this growth in agentic AI. And I picked up a couple customers right now that I'm partnering with to help them redesign their go-to-market structure because go-to-market process, as I talked to you about at Salesforce, becomes the differentiator.
Yeah.
You have that product market fit, but you also have that go-to-market fit. And you've got to help these customers get to the business outcomes they're signing up for. Because I've been in so many board meetings where the board's asking you, how are you using AI? And then the next conversation is, well, whatever you bought, what value is it creating for you? And if it's not, get rid of it and go find something that is. So if these companies, when you build your ideal customer profile, you've got to look at that as a lifetime value of a customer, not just getting a deal done. Because the second and third deal should be bigger than the first if you do right, but you got to solve business problems. You got to prove to them that you're solving these business problems every single day. Because if not, they're going to get rid of you. So many companies would be going like this. They're going to start going like this if they don't figure out how to make these customers get to the outcomes they agreed to. And so that's a big piece of what I'm focused on right now is helping these companies think through and implement a go-to-market end-to-end process that's going to show the customer what it's like and the business outcomes you're going to help them deliver in a pre-sale cycle to show them what it's like to be a customer, and then in a post-sale cycle to deliver that value. And there are different roles and responsibilities, different compensation plans, different skill sets, and there's a lot of agentic AI process you can implement in there to drive much more efficiencies to improve your productivity metrics. And how do you build business cases and value creation levers early in the sales cycle and then deliver those? I'm spending my time doing that and having a blast. And
So how do people get a hold of you? And why do you want them to get a hold of you? You want them to, for you to help them build out something that's like $5 million company?
yeah, so I'm typically working with Series A through C
Okay.
right now, but I'm building my ideal customer profile as well because I also want to be really thoughtful and ensure that I can actually add value. And so I'm looking for places that you have a founder CEO who's more of a product person, engineering person. We
Right.
have different skill sets.
Yep.
They have identified product market fit. Like they've got a product, they got a niche, and they've got to figure out though how to take that and turn the product feature into a value prop and an outcome-based value prop. And also something that is they want to be collaborative. They want to partner along this way. And with a board that's more of a venture capitalistic board, a VC backed board than a private equity backed board at this point. And and I'm looking for those three pieces of it. And you could say, all right, if you have a great product and if you have a good product market fit and you have a CEO that's me and the CEO have a different skill set, then that is really what I'm looking for.
Mhm.
Because if the CEO is more of a CRO than me and the CEO,
Might bump
we just yeah, we're bumping heads. And I think a lot of companies are out there. Like if I was going to go back to a CRO job, I would do it in a place that me and the CEO had a different skill set.
So how do they
And
reach you? We're running out of time, so I want to make sure. Like,
yeah, so Steve, I don't have a company name. I'm playing around with the name Strata Arc because Strata is foundational. I think it's architecture and Arc is scale. And I'm more of a go-to-market engineer than I am just like an advisor and a consultant or a fractional CRO. I'm going to help them architect and design. I'm going to help them build out their outbound motions too, which a lot of companies really do not know how to do to get more at bats, and then put the right infrastructure in there to go do that and build a bunch of their processes. And then you can start to layer on these capabilities. So it's my cell is 512-632-8387. My email is Steve Goldberg 4317 at Gmail. And I'm on LinkedIn. But my wife told me the other day, it's like my name is Steve Goldberg Consulting LLC. You got to change that. So I'm building out this infrastructure and I've signed a number of contracts right now, but I'm really trying to be thoughtful about the companies that I work with and ensuring that what they're trying to solve for, something I can really help them get to that outcome.
yeah, I would definitely suggest you keep doing your own shingle. I got my name Full Throttle Falato Leads from a Marine. I'm an Air Force veteran. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, so am I. He's like, you're full throttle all the time. I'm like,
I like it.
that's who I am as a sales guy and jiu-jitsu. So it's a long name, but it's me. So I get behind it. So
Love it.
really appreciate you making time for me today. You'll see this on my channel on my YouTube channel, which I'll send to you and post on LinkedIn and YouTube. And then we'll definitely keep in touch. And please, anybody that's out there wants advice, this guy's brilliant. Feel free to reach out to me or Steve, and I'll get you in touch with him. Thank you, Steve.
All right, thanks.